As we enter into the 8 o'clock hour, so it's very interesting. Thank you so much, and we'll be joining you back again later on. Now on to more conversations here in Morning at NTV. Hashtag is Morning at NTV. Priscilla, Regina, Daloga, looking into our Kickstarter conversation this morning, which is relating to the freedom of information as well as women inclusion in the freedom of information. Of course, the backbone of it is that recently the Africa Freedom of Information Center released a report on the inclusion of women-led businesses in public procurement. Now, to tell us more about this, I am joined by Mr. Gilbert Sendugwa, who's the organization's executive director. Good morning to you, Mr. Sendugwa.
Good morning, Priscilla. Thank you for having me here, and good morning, dear viewers.
Okay, so first of all, give us a background of AFIC, where it stems from and what's its mandate to us as Uganda.
Yes, the Africa Freedom of Information Center is the largest and leading civil society network that promotes the right information, transparency and accountability across Africa. And the reason why this organization was started way back in 2008 was because at that time, Africa did not had only 4 countries with access to information laws. Mm-hmm. And yet, the lack of access to public information by citizens was constraining and affecting many citizens in Africa by way of corruption being too high, by way of people not being able to properly participate in decision-making processes of government, among others. So fundamentally, when we started, our focus was on getting access to information laws passed in Africa. By 2015, the number of countries with these laws had increased to 14. So our new strategy then was on number 1, to promote the adoption of access to information laws, and number 2, on implementation of these laws. Today, the number of countries with access to information laws in Africa has increased to 27. About half of the continent, so we are still pushing for implementation of adoption of these laws and their implementation.
Okay, all right. Now, you did release this report on the inclusion of women-led businesses in public procurement. Why focus on women businesses, women-led businesses, and then why in particular looking at the procurement sector?
Yes, thank you very much for that. Public procurement is the main means through which government spends public resources to provide goods and services to citizens. And also, there is huge public interest because the biggest part of the budget is spent through public procurement. Across the continent, over 15% of the GDP every year is spent through public procurement. And here in Uganda, the government spends about 60% of the national budget through public procurement. So it is very, very important policy instrument. Now, the problem is that women-owned businesses take less than 1% of public contracts. And therefore, it means that women are not properly sharing in the national cake. And with the government commitments to address inequality, it is going to be very, very difficult when women-owned businesses are taking less than 1% of this 60% national budget every year to achieve the sustainable development goals as it relates to inequality, but also health and education and other key roles that women play in our families and societies. Okay,
Mr. Sendugwa, so what has led to women's participation being at 1%? And from the sound of it, it seems to be a continuous cycle. So what has been the embedment causes of that?
So we have carried out this study in Uganda, Kenya, Ethiopia, Rwanda and Tanzania to examine the barriers and solutions to women's participation in public procurement. We have found out many barriers, but we have categorized these into 3 groups. The first group relates to legal and policy barriers. The second category relates to operational and capacity challenges. And then number 3 is social cultural barriers. when it comes to policy barriers, you find that whereas women are significantly excluded, there are no policy measures in Uganda to promote their participation. In Tanzania and Kenya, for example, we found that governments there have amended laws to provide for this. And in Kenya, in addition to the legal regime, they have also put a program called Access to Government Opportunities for special groups, women, youth, and people with disabilities. But also, we find that in Uganda, the law was recently amended last year to provide for special groups. However, the regulations are yet to be adopted. And also, we have been having local content here. The implementation of these has not emphasized women, youth, and people with disabilities, and therefore they need to strengthen policy. They need to implement existing policies. Is very, very urgent and important to enhance women's participation.
Well, I know that the government has been very eminent and proactive in terms of pushing for equality in that equation, especially for women participation. But let's first go and backtrack a bit and talk about the social cultural barriers that you did mention, discovered in the report, hindering women from actively participating in the public procurement sector.
Yes, one of the things that we found was that the cultural norms and perceptions and expectations that women are supposed to be provided for in a home, and therefore not being able or free to engage as their male counterparts are, was a significant challenge. Secondly, we found the issue of sexual exploitation across the 5 countries, where demand for, all sorts of corruption, but specifically for women, sexual exploitation, either to win contracts or to be paid for the work that they have done, was a major constraint and barrier that the studies identified. We also found issues related with capacity of women enterprises, which is that procurement is a complex process. So women's ability to understand bidding documents and use them, make responsive bids, was a major challenge. The other issue was on access to finance. Women lack collateral they can use to secure financing opportunities from banks and other sources to undertake these projects. Ownership of land, ownership of assets, as a lack of this was also an associated problem. The other challenge was that in Uganda, for example, we found that 69% of women-owned enterprises doing business with government were located in Wakiso and Kampala district. So the rest of the districts, share 31%, and this is a big challenge. It means that then the wealth is going to be concentrated in a few areas of the country, and therefore it is important to address this challenge.
Okay.
The other one, which is, I didn't talk about it, related to legal and policy, is lack of a definition of what is a woman's owned business. The legal definition would help to direct efforts. So
please enlighten us, what would be the appropriate legal definition of a woman-led business?
Yes, for our study, we have developed a working definition that if a business is owned by a woman or women, 50% and above of their shareholding would then qualify as women-owned or led. Or if 70% of the staffing of that business, even when they don't own it, is owned by women, would then be classified as women-owned, women-led business. So the significant voice of women being in that business would be crucial in informing whether or not. Now, what we found also is that data by procurement data was not disaggregated in a gender manner, which means that when you say that, for example, in this financial year, Ministry of Local Government has issued maybe 300 contracts, how many of these have been taken by men-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, youth-owned businesses? And this is very, very important, because then it helps to know who is taking what and why, who is excluded and why, and what measures need to be taken to ensure, as the government has said, you know, everyone is financially secure.
Okay, so just to again interrogate further, when you mentioned some two elements in there, one of them of course was the sexual advances or favors or exchanges that are asked of women when they present their requests onto the public procurement space. The other was the mentality you mentioned, that women ought to be provided for than provide. And at the end of the day, these two actually come into play because it's not one-sided. It takes the men to present the sexual advances. Again, it will take either another man or even another woman to say, no, I mean, she ought to be sitting at home and they will fend for her, so don't award her that contract. Now, how do we change? What recommendations do you have so that those, you know, mindsets get to be changed?
Yes, first of all, we have recommended for strong disclosure, that everything should be done in the light. For example, who is taking what contract and why. They already provides for it, but the practice is not as at the level that it should. If payment is done, who has been paid? For those who there have been delayed payments, who are they? So by looking at this, for example, it could be that, you know, these particular women-owned businesses are not being paid or are being paid on time. So the issue is why this and why not that. So this would help to, you know, invite a conversation on these issues. Second, also, we have recommended for implementation of open contracting, which means that government is critically and proactively disclosing procurement information data on all stages of a procurement cycle. And associated with this also is promoting public participation. Participation directly in the bidding process, but also participation of citizens to monitor everything that is taking place along the
How is that to
cycle.
happen? Because the procurement, public procurement we're talking about right now is going digital. So if they're going digital, how will they embed these recommendations?
Yes, first of all, we have recommended that the capturing and reporting of procurement data is gender segregated. So what that means is that link the beneficial ownership of contract information with the procurement and make it public. This data is, some of it is already being disclosed, I mean required and therefore reported or captured, but then it's not at the front end, for example, of the government procurement portal or the EGP that the government is doing. So now they should put it on the front end so that, you know, people like us are able to access it and analyze and provide feedback to government. Second, also, there is need to be more intentional in building capacities of women-owned businesses. When this is done, you know, people then will understand that, you know, I have a right to complain if being treated unfairly.
And as you give us that submission, on whose burden and on who should that fall? On whose plate ought that to fall?
Yes, we have a regulator who is PPDA, and also we have the appeals mechanism, an independent appeals mechanism of PPDA. So if something is not going right or something has gone wrong, someone should be able to appeal or lodge a complaint, and it will be entertained. The problem is that many women-owned enterprises do not know about the appeals mechanism. They do not know even that they can bid for tender opportunities. Our study finds that 38% of businesses are owned by women, but only 44% of these are registered to do business with the government, and only 1% is doing business with government.
Receiving business from government. Okay, and by the way, allow me to interrogate further. So when you say doing business, does that mean enjoying the complete cycle in all its fairness, or it has, you know, some
when I say doing business with
doing business?
So I say when in doing
business, the government pays you 2 years later.
Yes, I mean here it means that ability to, you know, receive information about a tender opportunity, bid for it, and winning or not winning today, but being able to try tomorrow and the rest. So the problem is that you find the majority of the businesses exist and established and registered with the register of companies, but then only 44% of these are registered on the government procurement portal or the EGP, where entities must register in order for them to start bidding and doing business with the government.
Right.
So that is very, very critical. We need to get in as many women-owned businesses as possible to register in this register of suppliers of government.
Okay.
And then once they register, we need to ensure that they have capacity to prepare winning bids, first and foremost, but more important as well, to be able to successfully execute the tenders that they have won, because sometimes that is also a challenge, and particularly for women, in addition to lack of technical capacity, you find that access to finance to implement these contracts has been a major challenge for them.
All right, so there's definitely so many loopholes in women's participation in public procurement. While they could be eligible in terms of paperwork, they put themselves together and organize themselves for eligibility to be able to be considered for these awards. Then comes the challenge of capacity. Do they have the capacity to get, you know, these projects and doing business with government, basically? But then there's also relation to finances. Are they financially capable of doing business or even doing continuous business with the public space? But in between there, it all comes down and is shaped by access to information. Now, you talked about access to information laws. In Uganda, where do we stand? And for women accessing these laws, what is our state?
Yes, Uganda was actually the fourth country in Africa to adopt the Access to Information Act in 2005. And in 2011, government issued regulations to guide how that information can be requested for. Unfortunately, not many women understand that they have a right to information. Not many know how to exercise this right through the Access to Information Act by making an information request. So there is a huge, huge capacity gap on that front. The law, also the PPDA Act, Section 45, provides for transparency in a tendering and procurement process. And to promote this, the PPDA has set up the government procurement portal, and also Ministry of Finance is setting up the e-government system, e-government procurement system, where information is proactively disclosed. Now, the problem is that not many agencies are publishing there. For example, on the government procurement portal, there are nearly 272 registered agencies, but you find that less than 150 agencies are publishing information on the government procurement portal. In the health sector, according to the study that we released July 2020, in the health sector we found that of the 20 agencies which we analyzed, 6 had not published anything on the government procurement portal. Across all the entities, less than 1% of the procurement that had been disclosed. And in terms of value, that was about 3 trillion shillings, so a lot of money.
Yeah, so there's a gap there. Now, in terms of recommendations, what have the recommendations been to government in order to mitigate those gaps? Yes,
we have recommended for proactive disclosure, and that this disclosure should be aligned to open contracting data standards, which means that people are able to access procurement information across all the chain of the procurement cycle, from planning, tendering, award, and execution of and closure of contracts. That helps then for people to have the information, to have confidence and trust the respective government ministries and departments and agencies, and help also businesses to know and plan ahead of a procurement process. We have also recommended that agencies should comply with the Access to Information Act, that for information which they have not proactively disclosed and citizens request for it, that it should be provided within the required time of 21 days. We have also recommended that Parliament should amend the Access to Information Act to provide for an independent oversight. Section 43 of this act provides that every minister should make annual reports to Parliament on information requests. It also adds that where one information request has been denied, that the minister should explain why, for example, a ministry under a department under their supervision or agency under their supervision has not disclosed that request. But since the law was passed in 2005, no minister has ever complied with this requirement. So we think that that oversight is very weak.
Yes.
And Parliament, we have recommended, should amend this law to provide for an independent commission, information commission, where citizens can lodge complaints when they have been denied access.
Okay. Mr. Sendugo, time is fast spent, but at the end of the day, we still need to push forward in this conversation, especially as far as access to information is concerned. Now, as we wrap it up, and as you wrap it up for us, how do we make sure that we push women to actually be at the center of public procurement?
Yes, the key thing, first of all, is to start with already women who are in business. They have registered their companies. But you know, they are not doing anything with the government. So I think that is a good place to start and make sure that they have information on opportunities, huge opportunities that are available to do business with the government, and help them to register on the government suppliers register, and also enhance their capacities to be able to prepare winning bids. And also, in doing that, also to take into account the geographical realities. You can't say that 69% of the agencies doing with government being located in Kampala and Wakiso, and that is the health situation. The government needs to spread and ensure that women everywhere they are in districts are doing business with the government, and that is going to help. That also means that government needs to be more intentional in providing information and building capacities of these agencies to be able to do business with it.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Gilbert Sendugo, who is Executive Director for Africa Freedom of Information Center, and that report is definitely going to go a long way in mitigating the issues, the loopholes and the gaps that do presently exist, hindering women from actively participating and benefiting from the public procurement. That brings us to the end of our